we're down by 3. Look inside yourself, what do you see? The pain is in your mind, no, nothing stops me. Everyone is looking at me. Heart is pounding and we're down by 3. Look inside yourself, I know what I see. Do you have the guts to do it for me? Gonna sweat, gonna work, we're gonna burn, it's gonna hurt, we're gonna fight, we're gonna score, we're gonna win, we're gonna war. Right of the glass, kick some ass, kick some ass, right of the cage, turn the page. Time to break, not gonna choke. Game over, no class, don't gloat. If we win, we'll be the GOAT. Do you have the heart to give him some hope? Everyone is looking at me. Time to protest, I'm on my knees. Raise my fist so that everyone sees. I'm gonna stand up for what I believe. Gonna sweat, gonna work, gonna burn, it's gonna hurt, we're gonna fight, we're gonna score, we're gonna win, we're gonna war. Right on the glass, kick some ass, kick some ass, right of the cage, turn the page. Gonna sweat, gonna work, gonna burn, it's gonna hurt, we're gonna fight, we're gonna score, we're gonna win, we are going to war. Right of the glass, kick some ass, kick some ass, right of the cage, turn the page.
Here we go.
Welcome to Puckin' Pigskin. Great sports fans talking hockey and football with a dash of everything else.
Ready?
Hey, sports fans and friends. Thanks for tuning in on the Puckin' Pigskin Facebook page, the Shotgun Sport Network YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. We're coming to you live, Alberta. Please smash the like and hit the notification action is one of the best things about doing a fan-sided show live. Another great show for you tonight. Unfortunately, CFL All-Star and Mental had to be reset because 1 p.m. Eastern time, but we still have far, maybe get some playoff predictions. The Flames lost last Wednesday to the Vancouver Canucks 4-3 in overtime. then avenged that loss with a 4-2 win against the Vancouver Canucks on Saturday in Calgary. And just last night, they beat the Seattle Kraken 4-3 in overtime. Flames preseason record is now 5-0-1. Now, I know it's just preseason, but as a Flames fan, we'll see how October goes. They typically don't do October, so they keep this rolling. Action is tomorrow in Jets, and they will regular season October 9th in Vancouver against the Vancouver Canucks. Transactions: the Flames signed Calgary-born Andrew Basha to a 3-year entry-level contract. Flames' 41st overall pick spent last season with the Medicine Hat Tigers, where he scored a career-best 30 goals and 55 assists for 85 points. The Flames have trimmed down their preseason roster to 4 goalies, 14 defensemen, and 22 forwards for a total of 40 players still at camp. The Calgary Stampeders had their bye week this past week. You can see post-game reaction, players and coaches, players from the week before, and all kinds of other news at stampeders.com. The Stamps' next game is, of course, this Friday, October 4th in BC, where they will take on the BC Lions. Transactions: September 29th, the Stampeders added 4 American players to their practice roster. Receiver Josiah Irish, linebacker Markel Lee, defensive lineman Jet Bush, and Brandon Matterson. Then just today, they added American defensive back Keaton Ellis to the practice roster. So I have a bit of time here before Dave Naylor joins the show. So let's go over the the upcoming games this week. As I mentioned in the Fire and Horsepower report, the Calgary Flames visit the Winnipeg Jets tomorrow night and then host the Jets on Friday. The Flames have looked very hot this preseason so far. However, since trimming the roster, they have looked a little more average than they did to start the preseason. The Jets, on the other hand, have looked very subpar so far in the preseason with a record of 1-2-1. I see that our guest has now logged in. He's a Hall of Fame journalist and reporter for TSN covering the Canadian Football League. Dave Naylor, welcome to Puck and Pigskin.
Good to join you. I hope you got me talking more pigskin than puck, because although I covered the National Hockey League for 11 years, these days there are guys signing $70 million contracts and I don't recognize their names, which tells you I'm not literate in hockey anymore.
No kidding. No kidding. I feel the same way. I see these huge contracts being signed, and then, looking at preseason here, I'm looking at rosters and I'm like, I don't know who half these players are, and I can't even pronounce half their names.
It doesn't take you very long, when you're not covering a sport, to feel like you really don't know what the heck you're talking about. And I say that, like I hosted radio in Toronto for 5 years. So I was talking NHL hockey every single day, and I covered the league for 11 years in Ottawa and Montreal. And but these days I am not a puck guy in terms of my knowledge. No, all my energy is invested in pigskin.
Yeah, so you studied journalism at Carleton University in Ottawa. Give us a rundown of your journey from there to covering the CFL for TSN. Obviously, hockey was in between there somewhere.
Yeah, boy, we could fill up a show on this one, but because my career
notes.
Well, I don't know. People ask me that. How did you, Dave? How did you become the football guy at TSN? Like, you never played football, and I answer honestly, I don't know. No, I do, but it's real quick. I graduated with a degree in journalism from Carleton. I was very fortunate coming out of, actually not out of school, because I went back for an extra year to run the university newspaper, because I did not get a single job offer after graduating with a degree in journalism from Carleton. Not one. So I made a snap decision to go back and run the university newspaper for a year. from that, I was lucky to secure an internship with the Globe and Mail, which was fantastic. I mean, the Globe and Mail was a great place to intern because they didn't treat you like a student. You were treated like an employee. From there, I went to CBC Radio, and I worked for a couple of years as a producer on a weekly sports show called The Inside Track, which was more, magazine documentary style than it was, about who's going to win the championship or who won last night. I found that producing was not for me. I'm more a reporter than a producer, so I wanted to get out of producing. An opportunity opened up in Regina, Saskatchewan. I went out there for 2 years and worked as a sports reporter on radio for CBC Radio Sports, which no longer exists anymore. And I kind of had an inkling that CBC Radio Sports wasn't going to be long for this world, which is why I quit my job in November of 95. And for pretty much the next 5 years, I freelanced. And when I say I freelanced in radio, in TV, in print. You name it, I did it. I did the weather on CBC in Ottawa. I was the number 3 weather person at CBC in Ottawa, for 2 years. And so you name it. I often say I'm not the best at anything in journalism, but I might have done more different things than anybody in this country. Certainly anybody who's working as a sports reporter. So I freelanced for 5 years. And in 2000, I got hired by the Globe and Mail as a full-time sports writer, which was a great opportunity. I stayed there for a decade. While I was at the Globe, I started making appearances on TSN, sort of as, Dave Naylor of the Globe and Mail. And somebody at TSN said to me at some point, how would you like to go over here and work for us full-time and leave the newspaper business? And in coming up actually to my anniversary, it was 2010. Thanksgiving weekend was when I made that transition over to TV full-time. I have never looked back. I love working at TSN. It is a wonderful place with creative people. And if you have ideas, there's always somewhere to take them. I never saw myself as a TV guy. I always tell people, I say, TV found me more than I found TV. But I absolutely love it. And that is as quick a version as I can do of how I got here.
It's refreshing to hear that about TSN, because usually when people talk about TSN CFL football, a lot of fans say, oh, they're doing it all wrong. They're doing it all wrong. Why can't they, come up with better production and better stuff? But, I love TSN a lot, all the there and the Sports Center hosts. I love TSN and Sportsnet. So equally.
Well, I'm biased on that one, but I can just tell you from, what, no, I mean, honestly, and I got to be honest, I was a bit of a kind of newspaper snob who looked down on sort of sports television, right? Because the history of sports television was kind of what they call rip and read, right? That you would look at what the newspaper person did that day, and then you would use that on television. And newspaper people developed this real snob, attitude towards TV people, that they were always a day late and they were just reading what we wrote. But I think that really began to change, 30 years ago or so, when companies like ESPN and TSN said, well, why don't we actually go out and hire the best sports journalists rather than just borrowing them from the newspapers? And, Bob McKenzie was one of the leaders. Bob McKenzie was a Toronto Star columnist, right? And then TSN just said, well, why don't we just hire Bob McKenzie rather than, paying him to make appearances as a guy from the Toronto Star? And so, that's happened in a number of, and there's really a very strong commitment to journalism. And I've felt that since the day I walked in the door at TSN, and it's part of why I've loved doing it. We still get a lot of time opportunities to, like I said, if you have an idea at TSN, a good sound storytelling idea, there's somewhere to do it, and that's really what we value most, is the ideas. And I've been, it's funny when I think of, the way I used to view television sports kind of compared to the way I see it today. And it's evolved, and I guess so have I.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really like about TSN, is they actually have other shows other than just Blue Jays reruns and news and sports news.
Absolutely. No, we like to be storytellers. That's the way we think of ourselves.
Yeah, so let's get talking about some pigskin here. Give us your quick thoughts on what you've seen so far this season. What stood out in your mind? Who stood out in your mind so far? We're almost done this season here, but let's hear your thoughts so far.
Well, I can't remember a year where there has been so much parity and parity in games. So many games are close down to the very wire. The standings are close. Usually by this time of the year, we play 4 games a week in the Canadian Football League. There's 1 or 2 I feel like, I don't absolutely have to watch that one because we're at the end of September, October. There's a couple of teams that are, it's a 2-11 team playing a 10-3 team, right? I don't need to see that. But those games don't exist this year. There are every game has a compelling reason to watch. And I mean, I think we just had that last weekend. We're going to have it again this week. I don't know that there's been a year where there's been so much meaningful football in, again, and so few meaningless games. In fact, I don't think we've had a meaningless game on our schedule yet, which to get to October with that is tremendous. I think the play overall, I think, one of the criticisms some people could say is that, if you're looking at quarterback play, is there anybody who's having like an all-time season where you say, oh my goodness, this guy's season racks up against, this. No, I don't think there has been, but there also has been a very high floor, which might be more important, right? There's nobody whose team I would look at and say they're just a disaster at the quarterback position. Like if you watched the Miami Dolphins last night, they're a disaster at the quarterback position right now. There's nobody in the Canadian Football League that looks like that. And we have had, seasons, we have had teams in recent years that have looked like that. Ottawa in recent years has looked like that at the quarterback position, much of the last 4 or 5 years. So I think we have a higher floor of the players who are starting in the league. I think we have quality backups. So when there have been injured quarterback, it's not like a team drops off the cliff. Those are the things that really stand out for me, just the quality of the close games. And I say the overall quality of the quarterback play in the league right now. And there's nobody, rivaling Bo Levi Mitchell's best season ever or Anthony Calvillo's best season ever. But I think when you go across the league, and that's what's made the game so competitive, is that everybody is getting, competent level play at the quarterback position.
Yeah, you mentioned no meaningless games. I think the Alouettes and Blue Bombers are coming up soon, and that's pretty much a meaningless game. Well, for Montreal anyway.
It's the final one of the year. And, Winnipeg's kind of interesting. And I was talking about this a little bit earlier today that, they've won 7 in a row. They're in first place in the West. But you look at their final 3 games, at Hamilton this Friday, and then they have Toronto and Montreal. So, Montreal may have nothing to play for by the time we get to that last game, but certainly Hamilton and Toronto do. So, I'm sure Winnipeg wants to nail down first place, and then they'll be 1 home win away from being in their 5th consecutive Grey Cup, which, as we all remember, where they were when the season started, 0 for 4, hit July, winless, injured. Zach Collaros hasn't had the kind of season that we would expect, and yet, they've been able, between special teams, defense, and the play of Brady Oliveira and some emerging receiving talent around him, they've still been able to get to the top of the division.
Yeah, that last game could become a big game for Winnipeg too if the cards play out right. So you never know.
No, absolutely. And I think that's what we want to see because, it's hard for teams to manage. Never mind the teams that are out of it. Obviously, if you're 2-15 or something, the end of the year is not a lot of fun. But as we saw from the Toronto Argonauts last year, when you're 16-2, sometimes the end of the season isn't a lot of fun because, football is a game that's meant to be played meaningfully, and when the game results don't matter and you have to balance that with rust versus rest, not wanting to put players, make them subject to injury. I think there were many things that went into the Toronto Argonauts getting smoked in that Eastern Final last year against Montreal at home. But one of them was undoubtedly that they'd gone 2.5 months without playing a game that mattered. And I just think psychologically, you can tell yourself it matters, but it's different. Football is a game where you have to sacrifice. You have to really want it. And I think when a game doesn't matter, it's hard to want it and play at that same level that you do when a game's on the line. And it's not the way the game's intended to be played. So I'm as much as I'm glad there are no 2-15 teams this year. I'm also glad there are no 15-2 teams because it was really kind of disappointing that the Argonauts had all these games on the back half of their schedule last year, And then when we got to them, they didn't matter, and I don't think we want that either.
Yeah, and now you mentioned quarterbacks earlier, not nobody's standing out or anything. Bo Levi Mitchell and Jake Mayer are at or near the top of most of the quarterback stats last I checked, yet their teams are at the bottom of the standings. First of all, what does it tell you when we see that? And in hindsight, did the Stamps make a huge mistake trading Bo, you think?
Well, I think part of it, and Jake Mayer, this happened last year too. I believe he was the only quarterback in the league who started all 18 games for his team. Yeah. Again, this year he was benched for one game, but he hasn't been hurt, missed any. So, if you're going to be a quarterback and you're going to stand upright for every game all season, that alone is going to put you up in the quarterback's statistical standings, because that's pretty rare in the CFL that we see a quarterback make all 18 starts. And you'd have to think, if I go around the league right now, whether anybody's done that this year, I don't believe anyone has. When I go through team by team, there's nobody who's done that. So, playing every game for one is going to put you high in the standings, or put you on the upper half of the standings in general. And in Bo Levi Mitchell, it's fascinating because, he's leading the league in passing, leading the league in touchdowns. I believe his touchdown to interception ratio is about 26-14 now, I believe. Those are certainly, respectable numbers in any season. And, look, earlier in the year, there were a few things that were happening in Hamilton. Okay. And look, I'm actually glad the quarterback with the best stats isn't on the best team, because it reinforces a point I always try to make about football. Okay. I understand that quarterbacks are going to get the most analysis and the most conversation, and people are going to look at their play to determine, how it's going to affect the outcome of a game. Completely agree. However, this is not golf and this is not tennis. Okay. And I do hear football discussed as if there's one guy on the team and not 46, right? For instance, wins and losses. I hate hearing quarterbacks evaluated by championship. Well, he won so many Super Bowls or so many Grey Cups, and this guy only won. Yeah. If we were talking golf, sure. But I mean, there's three sides of the ball in football, right? Defense, offense, and special teams. Quarterbacks only play on one of those, and you need somebody to block, and you need somebody to pass protect, and you need somebody to catch the football. Those are all key elements to offense that quarterbacks, don't have anything to do with. So I don't like I always am, kind of trying to push back against the oversimplification of football just coming down to quarterbacks. In Hamilton's case, early in the season, penalties, turnovers, porous defense, right? So Bo's putting up lots of yards. And I think, there's something you're probably familiar with called complementary football. And what it means is basically how one side of the ball is playing will affect what another side of the ball is able to do. And I'll give you an example of kind of poor complementary football with Hamilton early in the season. Well, they're down early every game. The defense is getting run over. So what does Bo Levi Mitchell have to do when he's back there? Well, he's thinking to himself, if I don't throw for 1 million yards and 5 touchdowns, we're not going to win. So he's taking chances maybe that he shouldn't be, or that he wouldn't want to take. But because of they're not getting the play, they're not being held in games by defense, he's got to take those kind of risks, right? Yeah. Now you look at what Hamilton's getting of late, they're getting better defensive play. They're not falling behind in every game. So again, complementary. That allows the complementary football that's come around in Hamilton is that Bo Levi Mitchell's able to make different kinds of decisions and play more within the structure that his coach wants him to see and play in, because his defense and his special teams are holding them in the game. And that's I think a big part of why you look at his numbers and say, well, this team might not even make the playoffs, and yet this guy leads the league in passing yards and touchdowns. Normally, that's a pretty good indicator that you're going to have a good season. But just a reminder, 46 guys on a roster, 3 sides of the ball, quarterback only plays one of them. And it's one of my, as you can tell, little football pet peeves, right?
You could even take that a step further and say there's also coaching. So there's 4 sides.
Well, and coaching. I mean, I'll use an NFL example, but I was at that Super Bowl where the Seattle Seahawks threw the ball on the 1-yard line and it was intercepted by Malcolm Butler. Okay. So Tom Brady got a Super Bowl ring because of that play, basically. right? If they hand it to
Right.
Marshawn Lynch and he goes off tackle and boom, and he's in, Brady doesn't get it. So are we going to give Tom Brady's legacy? Are we going to regard his legacy differently because of that play? You know what I mean? He got a ring because of that play. He wouldn't have got a ring if they called another play and been successful. Yeah, it's just one that sort of jumps out as an obvious example of where hanging wins and losses or championships on quarterbacks is silly.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I mean, the best example I can give you is Dan Marino. I mean, he was an all-star quarterback and threw for over 30,000 yards, yet never won a Super Bowl. And he's in the Hall of Fame already, I believe.
Oh yeah, no, and you know, Trent Dilfer and Brad Johnson won Super Bowls, right? So yeah, absolutely. No, it again, it drives me nuts, right? So I mean, you're even seeing that. I think, you know, in the NFL, it's interesting right now. You have three quarterbacks that were basically washouts with the teams that drafted them, right? Geno Lewis, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold. Like, well, two of the guys are like leading the league in touchdown throws right now. I believe Darnold and Baker Mayfield.
Crazy.
And Geno Smith, you saw him on Monday Night Football last night playing very well. So, you know, is quarterback success about nature or nurture? No, fair amount of it is nurture. Like when you see a guy who looks terrible in one spot, now some of it can be him figuring it out and maturing and having a different approach. But, you know, there's no question. I think the team that a player ends up with, look, and you can see it in the Canadian Football League for years and years and years. If you do a list of the greatest CFL quarterbacks of the last 40 years, you know, do a list of the best 25 you can think of. A ton of them are going to come from Edmonton and Calgary and BC. You know what I mean? It's just those organizations were consistently good at identifying and developing quarterback talent, you know, and frankly, like organizations like Toronto and Hamilton, you know, Toronto developed Zach Collaros and Trevor Harris and now Chad Kelly. But if you go to before Jim Barker got to Toronto in about, 2009, I think, look at the Argonauts' previous 40 years of developing quarterbacks. It almost doesn't exist. You know, it's like they were just going and getting somebody else's quarterback who had already been developed. So there is a skill.
Holloway wasn't bad.
Pardon me?
Conridge Holloway wasn't bad.
He wasn't bad, but I believe he was in Ottawa before he was in Toronto.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
So there you go. Yeah.
Now, since talking about quarterbacks is one of your pet peeves, I swear this will be the last question about quarterbacks.
Oh, it's not talking about quarterbacks. Not one of my pet peeves. Hanging wins and losses on quarterbacks is my pet peeve. Okay, fair enough.
Go. What do you make of the quarterback situation in Edmonton right now, and how do you see things playing out there?
Boy, it's puzzling to me, and I say that. Look, there were a lot of people in the media that really were against seeing McLeod Bethel-Thompson brought in and over Trey Ford. Okay, I was not one of them. Okay, no, and again, these are opinions. This is what we do, right? I was not one of them. I recognized what I thought they were doing was saying, look, Trey Ford may have a higher ceiling than McLeod Bethel-Thompson, but we think McLeod Bethel-Thompson has a higher floor. Okay. And look, Chris Jones knew he didn't have a lot of margin for error going there, right? In year three. So I understood the philosophy there. And, you know, there's something in football that we talk about called variance. And variance is what's the range of play you're going to get, right? Like when you talk about a high variance player, you're talking about a guy who might go out and throw for 290 yards and 3 touchdowns and no interceptions, but next week might throw for 173 and get picked off twice, you know? And again, younger players have a higher level in general. Younger players have a higher level of variance than older players do in general in the quarterback position, right? You get more consistency, even if that younger player might have a higher ceiling. So I understood what Edmonton was doing when they went with McLeod Bethel-Thompson over Trey Ford. What I don't understand is that once you went to Trey Ford and you won some games, and then, okay, he got hurt, so you go back to McLeod Bethel-Thompson, and you won some games. Now, I would have either just stayed with McLeod Bethel-Thompson the rest of the way, or if I went back to Trey, I would have stayed there. But I don't understand going from McLeod off the 2 wins against Calgary to Trey, back to McLeod. I think it's got to be frustrating for both guys. I wonder how the team reacts to it. Look, I think, coming off the first game against Winnipeg, you could have had Trey Ford start the game with the understanding that, hey, we got very small margin for error here. Like, this is a near must win for us. If it's not clicking for you, we're going to go to the other guy after, we'll see where we are middle of the second quarter or so. And that's not, you still want him to play free. You don't want him to play like you feel like he's got a hook one away. But that's the reality of the team of the season for the team. I just found it surprising. And then, the question is, what are they doing beyond this? Well, there's so many layers to that question because we don't know who the coach is going to be. We don't know who the GM is going to be. We don't know how anything that Trey Ford has experienced in Edmonton is necessarily going to be reflective or be factoring into his decision, because he's a free agent at the end of the season, about whether he wants to come back, because it could be different personnel. Or if Jarius Jackson and G-Roy Simon get to the end of the year and say, well, we wanted to play it out with McLeod, but we're prepared to make you our guy next year. If there's not another team that's going to make him the starting quarterback, well, then I think he'll be back, right? So it's really hard to sort of understand, they're going from gut instinct here a little bit, I think. And I know McLeod's practiced more and he's more of a veteran guy. And sometimes you say, look, he's the guy you paid the money to. You're going to win or lose with him. But it's at this point, I am, I guess, on the train of people like yourself and others that say, boy, I'd just be playing Trey Ford. And I didn't say that for the first, half of the season.
I think I kind of have the same opinion you do, is play one or the other, but don't keep flip-flopping. We talked about that last week on the show with the Elks herd as well. They just keep flip-flopping, and it's not doing anybody any good.
No, and especially at this stage of the season. I get early in the season sometimes when you're, in the CFL, training camp's so short. You only have 2 preseason games. You're really kind of evaluating your roster for the first month of the season or so, right? But at this point in the year, and that's why I think, BC, when they went into their bye week 2 weeks ago, and they kind of, evaluated, and they said, okay, we got to decide. Are we going to ride with Nathan Rourke, or are we going to ride with Vernon Adams? And one of the things they wanted to do, or they committed to do, from what I understand, when they went into that bye week conversation, is say, when we come out with our decision, that's our decision for the rest of the year. Like, we're not going to get into this flip-flop the rest of the way. Now, I guess, if you had extreme circumstances, you could see them, make a change like any team would, but they weren't going to be this, okay, we're going to go Nathan Rourke 1 week and then Vernon Adams the next, and back and forth. Like that was not what they wanted to do. And yet it feels like kind of that's the way Edmonton's gone.
Yeah. I don't want to keep you too long here. I know you're a busy guy. So I'm a Stampeders fan, of course, and I'm trying to focus this show more on Calgary sports. So I have to ask your thoughts on what we're seeing from the Stampeders this season.
They remind me a little bit of what kind of happened to Ottawa after the good years. And that is that they not only, weren't as successful on the field, but they kind of lost their identity. Like, I don't know what the identity of the Stamps is right now. That's they kind of become a bit of a milquetoast team to me. And some of their best players on offense, receivers are kind of getting on in years a little bit. So I think that becomes a concern when you look at the way the team's record is stacked up the last few years. Do they have those players in the pipeline that are, Calgary's always been, just a reload team, right? That they could find guys. They would introduce players to the league, would have success. They would go elsewhere and get paid more money. And Calgary would introduce a guy at camp the next year. And by halfway through the season, everybody knew his name and why he was special. That flow of players, hasn't been as consistent. And I just think, again, I think they've been a little bit, lacking in identity. And, Jake Mayer has given them sometimes, when you get there's an expression in sometimes I've heard called, just good enough to get you beat sometimes. Right. And that's kind of what Jake Mayer seems like this year. And he's not terrible. So you look at it and say, oh my God, we got to get another guy to play quarterback. Right. Sometimes it's easier if it's so obvious to you that this guy is not your guy. Well, it's not that way with Jake, right? Because he has his moments. And, he broke in very quickly into the league and had a series of, 300-yard games right off the bat. And yet the growth and kind of the extension of that hasn't transpired. And I don't, given what's happened there the last couple of years, and one thing he has done certainly is stayed healthy. I'll be very curious to see if Calgary is going to be committed to him beyond this season. I tend to think not, given the expectations and where the bar is. And yeah, it's not all about quarterback play, but, quarterbacks of losing teams usually get replaced, at least, especially if it's not a losing season, but, a series of losing seasons. So, they've been kind of a puzzling team, but I think it's been kind of some of their best players getting older, and again, just not guys that have stepped up ready for prime time and to take their places or push them.
Would you pin any of this on Dickinson becoming GM and Hufnagel stepping aside?
It's hard not to, because the timing of the two things, coincides, perfect, right? So whether that's just optics but it's hard to say, oh no, it's got nothing, and I think the question, one of the things that the organization I think is going to have to address, probably the first thing they're going to have to address after the season, is do they want Dave to continue to do both jobs? Because if you look around the Canadian Football League, now that Chris Jones is, calling defense in Hamilton, there's nobody else in the CFL who's doing both jobs. It is split everywhere else. So, the model is not the way it is in Calgary right now. And I know it's hard because with the operations cap, coaches can't get raises without taking on other duties, right? So, but I think that was the major criticism of what went down in Edmonton, was not that Chris Jones, isn't a quality football guy, but that he was wearing too many hats. And maybe in Calgary, 2 hats is enough, or is too many. Like maybe, and I think that'll be the curious thing for me. And does that mean that Dave Dickinson wants to be a GM, which is, a lot of coaches, do move upstairs as they get older and longer in the game. But boy, Dave Dickinson feels like a coach to me. I have trouble thinking of Dave not coaching. So, I'm sure there's gonna be some reevaluation there. And I don't think Dave's, look, he still never missed the playoffs in his career as a player or a coach, I believe. So let's not have him kind of out the door when before we acknowledge the fact this is a guy who's never missed the playoffs. Okay, but clearly the trajectory of the team is not positive right now, and I think you're going to see some changes, some significant changes there. But I think they're going to involve Dave Dickinson. I would be surprised if Dave Dickinson is not part of that organization next year.
Yeah. Now the Owls, of course, are defending champions and looking pretty unbeatable so far. In fact, one of my guests a couple of weeks ago, Coach Phil, said this may be the best team ever assembled in CFL history. Number one, would you agree with that? Number two, are they going to repeat as Grey Cup champions, you think?
No, I would not agree with the best team ever assembled. I would not even come close on that. And I say that it's funny. I was the one who kind of dug in when they got to 18-1, right? We have a CFL as a statistician historian named Steve Daniel, and I reached out to him and said, can you find any other team that's burned off 18-1? And we went back to the start of the East-West schedule in the CFL, which is about 1961. That's where it wasn't just East Division playing among itself and West Division, but they actually crossed over. And from that time on, there had never been a team that hung an 18-1 streak. Now, part of it is, when you have a really good season, you rest guys at the end of the year, you never really get losses. And Montreal's streak, carried from the second half of one season and the first half of another. But a couple things about Montreal. Now, wins are wins, I get. But it's not like they blow everybody out. They've got a lot of one-score wins. And even in that streak, in this season alone, I believe they've had 3 double-digit comebacks, games that they were down by 2 scores or more and had to come back. And again, 18-1 is 18-1. No one else has ever done it. But I think if you look at how that was, does that tell me that's one of the great teams in CFL history? No, it wouldn't. I would put the Montreal teams of the Mark Trestman era ahead of them. I would put the Toronto Argonauts of the Doug Flutie era ahead of them. And people hate when I say this, but I believe it. The greatest CFL team I ever saw was the 1995 Baltimore Stallions. Who did not have a single Canadian on the roster. And that's why it bugs people. But yeah, no question, it was a huge advantage. But there were 4 or 5 other U.S. teams that had the same advantage that weren't able to come close to that. So no, I believe the Baltimore Stallions are the best CFL team I ever saw. Offense, defense, special teams, they were special. And look, I think what Montreal built on defense has been special. And I think Cody Fajardo's played some of the best football of his life. But I still would not put the Owls in that all-time great conversation. No.
All right. Last question, then I'll let you go for the night. What are your thoughts on the Jonas Brothers doing the Grey Cup halftime show?
It's funny. I am not a music guy of the modern pop variety. So I recognize the Jonas Brothers. I know they're very big with a younger audience, although their prime was a bit ago, so maybe you get a little older audience with it, but carrying the younger audience. Hey, I'm good with it. I think honestly, I think what's important for Grey Cup halftime shows is, one, you want quality entertainment, but two, you want to bring eyeballs on the game that wouldn't otherwise be on the game. And I think it's an opportunity to grow the audience, and so I can see how the Jonas Brothers would do that. So I'm giving them, 2 thumbs up. There you go.
All right. Well, thanks for the CFL insight tonight. You're definitely one of the greatest minds in the CFL right now, journalism-wise. So it was great to get those thoughts. Tell everybody where they can find you on socials and whatnot.
Best place to find me on socials on Twitter at TSN Dave Naylor, and my work also lives on tsn.ca, and of course, SportsCenter and all that kind of stuff.
Great, excellent. Thanks a lot, Dave, and have a great evening.
I will. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No worries. All right, sports fans and friends on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be notified when we go live or post. And like and follow at Puck and Pigskin on X, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff. That does it for me here at Puck and Pigskin World Headquarters. Go check out all the great shows on the Shotgun Sports Network, including The Elks Call with my friends Catherine and Scout, a.k.a. The Elks Herd. They go live every Wednesday at 8:30 Pacific Time on the Shotgun Sports Network YouTube channel. From Puck and Pigskin World Headquarters here in Red Deer, have a great night.